I never should have followed him into the woods that day. Each step we took made our feet feel heavier, like there were invisible weights being wrapped around our ankles. But as we turned to look behind us, we noticed there were no footprints left in our tracks. It's like our entire being was blending into the woods. Then we suddenly stopped, and we saw them. But I'll be quick. Welcome to my YouTube channel. If you're the type of person that likes to suspend their disbelief and be fully immersed in creepy stories about myth and legend, then you've come to the right place. If you like this story, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content like this. Let's jump into it. So back when I used to live in Colombia, I went to an all-boys Catholic private school. It must have been when I was in 3rd or 4th grade, right before my family moved to the States. The school was nestled in the rolling hills of the Eje Cafetero, which is the region most famous for growing and producing the highest quality Colombian coffee. The next time you drink Starbucks, it's very likely the coffee beans used to make your latte came from that region. The school was about 45 minutes away from where I lived in the city, so every morning a bus would pick me up and the other kids that lived nearby. Even though the commute was long, the panoramic views of the countryside and the luscious green landscape made up for it. You know how certain smells are tied to a memory in your childhood and can take you back to a specific moment in time? For some kids, it may be cotton candy at a carnival. For others, it may be the smell of peanuts at a baseball game. For me, it's definitely coffee. I still remember rolling down the windows and smelling that rich, coffee-flavored air as we entered the Colombian countryside from the city. After everyone arrived at school, we gathered outside in the courtyard to sing the Colombian national anthem and listen to a prayer by the school priest. After we were dismissed, we all went to our homeroom class to hear the morning announcements before the school day officially began. My teacher, Miss Vicky, asked me to come up to the front of the class and grab a stack of papers to pass out to the rest of the students. She told us that we were going on a field trip tomorrow, and that if we wanted to go, we needed those permission forms signed by our parents. Naturally, we all asked where we were going for the trip. She said we were going to the Parque del Café, which is a coffee-themed amusement park. It's actually set on a working coffee farm and hosts over 1 million visitors a year. With its cultural attractions, dozens of rides, the highest quality coffee you will ever drink in your life. It's like the Mecca and Disneyland for coffee drinkers. But us being kids and all, we were more excited for the roller coasters than the actual coffee itself. Now, my best friend Kevin is usually quite timid in class, but as soon as he heard Miss Vicky mention we were going to the Parque del Café, his ears perked up. He immediately grabbed his pencil, took out a piece of paper, scribbled a note on it, folded it into a little paper football, and flicked it over to me. I looked at the note and he read, "Meet me next to the soccer field at lunchtime." I thought that was pretty funny because we always meet up at the soccer field during lunch anyway, so I'm not sure why he went out of his way to write it on a piece of paper and give it to me. But you know how kids get when they're excited about something. So I went to meet him at the soccer fields during lunch. I must have waited for about 20 minutes before Kevin finally showed up, which was odd because he's never late to meeting up to play soccer. He was acting skittish and was walking hunched over holding a thick book close to his chest. I asked him, "Dude, what took you so long? Why are you holding a book? I thought we were playing soccer." And he said very quietly, "I stopped by the library to pick up this book, but don't tell anybody because it's banned for the younger students. I had to pay one of the high schoolers to get it for me." I looked at the book he was holding and the title read Leyendas y Mitos de Colombia, which translate to Colombian Myths and Legends. The book looked like it was over 100 years old. It was like those old history books that don't have any cover art whatsoever. It was a solid jade green color with golden faded letters in the title. That book was oozing creepiness. Kevin got closer to me and he grabbed my shoulder and nudged me to turn around so our backs were facing the kids playing in the soccer field. He whispered, "Look at this." He had 3 bookmarks in the book. 1 red, 1 yellow, and 1 green. He first opened the book and flipped it to a page where he had the red bookmark. The chapter read La Pata Sola, which translates to the one-legged woman. Then he quickly flipped to the next chapter with the green bookmark. It read El Mohan, which doesn't have a direct English translation, but it's often used to denote a spirit or shapeshifter. And then he flipped it to the yellow bookmark, and that chapter's title read El Ojaresquín, and I had no idea what that one meant. I was already creeped out at this point by the way Kevin was acting, so I backed off immediately after he showed me the book. I was like, "Dude, what's with you? Why are you showing me this?" And he looked at me very seriously and said, This is what's hiding in the woods next to the coffee park. My brother told me there is a hiking trail in the park that has statues of all three of these mythical legends. It said the coffee farmers built the statues decades ago to honor these creatures and keep them away from coffee fields in the surrounding forest. I looked at him like he completely lost his mind. Even though Kevin was shy in class, he was a very adventurous and bold kid. He was always the first one to volunteer for a dare and never backed away from a challenge, which often got him into a lot of trouble. But I never thought of him as superstitious. I turned to him and asked, Kevin, you know these are just folklore fairy tales. You don't actually believe these creatures exist, do you? And he looked at me straight in the eyes with the most deadpan face he's ever given me. He said, I do. And we're gonna find them tomorrow. Before I could even think about what to say next, the bell rang abruptly, which meant lunch was over and it was time to get to our next class. Kevin immediately shut the book and walked away without saying another word, deep in thought like he was in some sort of trance. I've never seen him that focused before. On the bus ride back home, all I could think about was those mythical creatures that Kevin told me about. Kevin may not have been superstitious, but I definitely was. I believed every ghost story that my cousins or parents would tell me as kids. Anytime I watch an even remotely scary movie, it didn't even have to be an actual horror film, just a thriller with jump scares, I would have nightmares and have trouble sleeping for a week straight. And that night was no different. I could barely sleep thinking about the field trip the next day. The next morning when we arrived at school, we did our typical morning routine before the school day started. But after we were dismissed, instead of going to class, Ms. Vicky told us to go straight to the parking lot. There was a big navy blue bus sprawled across 5 parking spots, waiting for us to board and take us to the coffee park. Once I got in, I saw Kevin sitting all the way in the back of the bus, and he gestured for me to sit next to him. As soon as I took my seat, he said, okay, here's the plan. He took out a map out of his backpack and spread it across his lap. Then he took out a pen and started pointing to different areas of the map like he was coordinating an expedition. This is the region around Parque del Café. The park's entrance is located on this hilltop next to the observation deck. We'll most likely take the cable car to the base of the park below. Once there, we'll do a tour of the coffee farm, the museum, probably see a play, and then go down the trail of myths and legends before we have some free time to go on the roller coasters. And that will be our chance to sneak away. He looked at me with his determined, mischievous smile. I asked him, how do you know the park so well? Have you been there before? He said, my brother actually went to the park last year and he told me the schedule he had with his class. The school pays the park a bunch of money every year to take us, so pretty much the same itinerary. And I said, why on earth do you want to find these creatures, Kevin? Aren't they known for being dangerous? And he said, because I want to get proof. As he said that, he took out of his backpack 2 Kodak single-use cameras. You know, the ones with the yellow and red plastic cover? He gave one of them to me and said, look, we don't have much film to work with, so don't get too trigger happy with it, okay? My heart started pounding. This kid was actually serious about sneaking away from our class field trip and going monster hunting in the woods. Kevin could sense how uneasy I was feeling. Don't worry, we have each other's back. We're gonna go in the woods, take some pics, and get back out before anyone even notices we're gone. Well, that was easier said than done, I thought. Miss Vicky was like a bloodhound whenever we went on field trips. She was like the worst version of a helicopter parent you can think of. She would do double and triple head counts throughout the entire field trip. And even if someone had to use the bathroom, she would make everyone wait until that kid got back to the rest of the group. I had no idea how we're gonna get past her, but looked like Kevin had a plan, so I went along with it. We stayed quiet during the bus ride to the park. After about half an hour, the bus pulled up to the entrance of the park. All the students got out of the bus and Miss Vicky counted each and every one of us as we stepped outside. We all got in a single file and started walking up the hill to the park entrance. Even though it was only around 8:30 a.m., there must have been like 400 people waiting at the gate. And like Kevin said, there was a huge observation deck overseeing the entire park. The lines moved quickly and we got on the cable car to take us to the main area of the park below. Once we got to the main area, we were greeted by a tour guide. After the tour of the museum and coffee farm, we went into a theater to watch a play about the history of coffee production and indigenous tribes in Colombia. There were some dancers that came out and performed a traditional Colombian dance. I looked at Kevin and I thought this would be the perfect moment to sneak off, but he simply shook his head and whispered, "Not yet." After the play ended, we all waited outside until Miss Vicky finished another head count. I asked Kevin why we didn't sneak away during the play. It was dark, looked like the perfect moment to go monster hunting. He leaned over to me and said, "We needed more time than the runtime of the play." The rides to the roller coasters are super long, so we'll have more time then. After Miss Vicky finished her head count outside of the theater, another tour guide showed up. But this guy was completely different from the other tour guides. All the other guides had worn a white polo with the official logo of the Parque del Café on it and khaki shorts. This guy looked like an actual coffee farmer. He wore a sombrero hat that covered his tan face, a long-sleeved checkered blue short, faded blue jeans, and a folded poncho over his shoulder. He looked like he came straight from picking coffee beans in the farm next to us and was going to give us a tour before he went back to work. He was also very curt and direct with us. He didn't greet us or introduce himself at all. He just said, "Follow me," turned around and started walking. Miss Vicky didn't tell us where we were going next, but Kevin whispered to me, "Now we're going to the Trail of Myths and Legends." Once we reached the western edge of the park, the path started winding down towards a paved trail. Almost immediately after we reached the first bend in the trail, we stopped. The coffee farmer was standing next to a statue. The statue must have been 6 foot tall. It was a Neanderthal-like man that was taking a knee. He had long white hair and a full beard, and had green thick moss covering his arms, shoulders, and head. There was a small plaque next to him that read El Mohan. It was the exact same name that was in the book that Kevin showed me yesterday. The coffee farmer said, "This is El Mohan. He's the spirit of the forest. There are many legends about him. Some say he's the ghostly form of an ancient Indian from an indigenous tribe that was ravaged by colonizers. Others say shamans are able to invoke his spirit and take on his shape-shifting abilities. There are tales of shaman and elder tribesmen shape-shifting into monstrous alligators to protect the riverbeds from greedy people prospecting for gold." All the other kids in the tour looked absolutely terrified as the coffee farmer was explaining the background of this mythical creature. But I turned to look at Kevin, and this kid was visibly excited. He took out his Kodak camera and snapped a photo of the statue. The coffee farmer immediately snapped at him. "Hey kid, no pictures during the tour. After we're done, I'm gonna ask you to give me the film." Kevin had a sly smirk on his face as he put the camera away in his backpack. The coffee farmer started walking again down the paved trail, and we followed him. It wasn't very long until we reached the next bend of the trail with another statue on it. This one looked like that of a green troll covered in orange leaves. He had hooves for hands, and his feet looked like paws of some sort of feline creature. "This is El Hojarasquín," the coffee farmer said. "He's the protector of the flora and fauna in Colombia. Legend has it he misleads hunters by leaving footprints of his hooves or paws, but puts them in reverse to fool the hunters and steer them away from the animals they're hunting down. He also appears behind loggers and tree cutters right before they cut a tree down. And when they see his shadow or sense that there's something standing behind them, he belts out a blood-curdling roar to scare them away. He's not always bad though. He's also known for helping lost people in the jungle or woods, especially children. But they have to be respectful of nature, otherwise he will not do anything to help them." I could tell the other kids in the group were starting to get seriously creeped out, myself included. One of them asked the coffee farmer how much longer they had to finish the trail. He said, "Almost done. We just have one more to see." He continued walking down the path and we followed along. We got down to the last bend of the trail, and as we turned the corner, the group of kids that were in front of us shrieked and immediately took a step back. As soon as we pulled up around the corner, we saw there was another statue right in front of us, which is why the other kids got that jump scare. The statue wasn't really big, but it was definitely the most disturbing looking of them all. It looked like a bald, goblin-like woman, and it only had one leg. The coffee farmer said, "This is La Pata Sola, the one-legged woman. She is the vengeful protector of the woods, and the most dangerous of all the myths and legends portrayed here. Legend has it she takes the shape of a seductive woman lost in the woods. She lures men in with her beauty and pretends to be hurt or in distress. Once they get close enough to her, she reveals her true, monstrous form and devours them." The coffee farmer paused and looked at all of us with an inquisitive stare. "This is the end of the trail of myths and legends. Remember kids, be kind to Mother Nature. You just never know who you're going to run into in the woods." And with that, the coffee farmer tipped his sombrero and took his leave. All the kids looked absolutely petrified after he left. Miss Vicky cleared her throat nervously and said, "Okay kids, now we have some free time to go on the roller coasters before we get back on the bus. Make sure to pair up with another student and be back in the main area in exactly 1 hour." Kevin and I bolted back to the top of the trail. Once we got there, he took out his map and laid it out on the ground in front of us. Okay, here's where we are now. We need to go out west of the park, past the coffee farms, and into the woods. I immediately snapped at him. Bro, are you insane? After listening to the farmer talk about the terrible things these creatures do to people, you still want to go find them? He said, you heard the coffee farmer. They mostly go after hunters and tree loggers. We're just gonna take some pictures and head right back. Don't worry about it. But I was worried about it. Now that we actually went to the trail and learned about the stories from these myths and legends, I was terrified. The last thing I wanted to do was go into the woods and proactively look for them. Kevin ignored my trepidation and picked up the map and started heading out the coffee park. I knew Miss Vicky would kill me if I came back to the main area without Kevin, so I had to stick with him. I caught up to Kevin and we exited the main campus out of the coffee park and started walking through a coffee field. We noticed there were some coffee farmers picking beans ahead of us, and there was a man standing over them with a sombrero on. It was the same tour guide that took us through the hiking trail before. As we were walking past him, he put his hand up in front of us. We immediately stopped. He looked at Kevin sternly and said, "You're the kid that took a picture of the statue during the tour of the trail. I forgot to ask you before, but I'm gonna need the film of the photo you took." Kevin replied defiantly, "Fine. You can have the picture of the statue. We're gonna take a photo of the real one anyway." I was expecting the coffee farmer to laugh at what Kevin said. Like, oh, look at this cute kid trying to find the real monsters in the woods. But he looked at us very seriously and said, "The protectors can be seen with the naked eye." He said this in a very matter-of-fact type of tone, like he's used to explaining this many times before. Then he said, "If you want to see them, you'll need some help from the earth. Come with me." He started walking towards a small cottage right next to the coffee farm. I was obviously concerned about following a random stranger to his house to give us something from the earth. But Kevin was clearly curious enough to follow along. I figured if this guy tried anything weird, we both could find a way to escape. To my relief though, once we got to the cottage, the coffee farmer asked us to wait outside. He went in for a few minutes and came out with a tray holding 3 small coffee cups. There were 3 coffee beans placed right in front of each cup. 1 yellow, 1 green, and 1 red. The coffee farmer said, "If you want to see the protectors of the forest, you will need to drink these specialty coffee drinks. They're made from 3 different types of beans, each one connected to a protector of the forest." I wasn't about to drink a single sip of these drinks. For all we knew, he probably laced them with some drug to knock us out and kidnap us. I grabbed one of Kevin's arms firmly and said, "Let's go back." He didn't budge though. Kevin looked at the farmer and said, "So you're saying if we drink that coffee, we'll be able to see El Mohan, El Hojarasquín, and La Patasola?" The farmer said yes, but only for 1 hour. Once he wears off, you need to get out of the woods. Kevin took 1 coffee cup and started sipping it. He handed it over to me and then took a sip of the other 2 drinks. I was flabbergasted by how willingly Kevin took those drinks. He looked at me and said, "If you're scared, you can go back to the park." Kevin knew exactly which one of my buttons to press. I took a sip of all 3 drinks. I wasn't really used to the taste of coffee back then, but I remember it tasted very bitter, with the cup made from the red coffee beans tasting the most bitter of the 3. Out of habit, we'd said thank you to the farmer, although I'm not sure what we were thanking him for. We had no idea what was waiting for us in those woods. The coffee farmer said, "Be careful in there," tipped his sombrero and went back inside the cottage. We started walking back toward the woods. All of a sudden, I felt this wave of anxiety wash over my body. I didn't know if it was a caffeine rush from the coffee or if I was just getting nervous about going on this misadventure with Kevin. Before I knew it, we were already inside the woods. I don't even remember how we got there. It seemed from one moment to another we were surrounded by trees and bushes. Trees didn't look like the normal ones that you find in that region of Colombia. The coffee region is typically covered with wax palm trees, which are the world's tallest palm trees and is known as the country's national tree. But the trees that surrounded us were mahogany. They had strong, sturdy trunks with thick branches covering the canopy. There was also a thick, hazy fog permeating through the air, which made it difficult to see in front of us. I told Kevin, "Hey bro, maybe we should start getting back." He simply said, "Have your camera ready. We may not get another opportunity like this." Then something weird started happening. As we kept walking, my feet started to feel heavier, like invisible weights were being wrapped around my ankles. I thought maybe I was getting tired, but I was a pretty athletic kid. Kevin and I would spend hours playing soccer every day, during and after school, so we had really good conditioning. And it only felt like we were in the woods for maybe 15 minutes. I looked at the ground thinking maybe my feet were sinking into the mud, but the ground was firm and sturdy. Something caught my eye though. We were walking at a steady pace and planted our feet firmly on the ground, but our shoes were not leaving any footprints. I turned to look behind us, but noticed there were no footprints left in our tracks. My heart rate also noticeably started to slow down. I started getting lightheaded, and all my senses became enhanced. I heard every note the birds were chirping in the canopy of a 200-foot mahogany tree. I was able to smell the sweet nectar from the flowers the bees were pollinating, and it felt like the wind was going right through me. In fact, it felt like I was the wind. It felt like my entire body was blending into the fabric of the woods, as if we were becoming the woods itself. I was about to say something to Kevin, but we suddenly stopped. We had reached the bank of a river cutting straight through the woods. The river was wide, with murky streams snaking through bends and boulders. On the other side of the river, we saw a group of people gathered around the riverbed. There must have been at least 24 of them. They were holding pans, shovels, picks, and containers. The people holding the pans were bent over the river. It looked like they were prospecting for gold. All of a sudden, I felt this rush of anger bubble up in my chest. As they were rummaging in the river, it felt like their hands and fingers were digging deep in the pit of my own stomach. I could see Kevin was feeling the same way by the strained look on his face. Then we heard some whispering behind us. We turned around abruptly and saw a group of 5 native Indians stalking towards us. They were holding spears, bows, and arrows. We put up our hands up, showing we were harmless. I belted out immediately, "I'm sorry, we're not here to cause any trouble." But they walked right past us, staying close to the ground. One of the older Indians, who looked like the chief of the group, took out a small flask and took a swig of it. He passed the flask around to the rest of the group so they could drink as well. Then they all got into the river slowly, until they were completely submerged. The water was so murky that we couldn't see them anymore. They must have been underwater for at least 5 minutes. Then we saw some bubbles trickle up to the surface. I was expecting them to come out gasping for air, but what we saw next was unbelievable. 5 giant alligators emerged to the surface of the water. Now, I've only seen alligators up close at the zoo, but these looked much bigger. They looked like the giant alligators that you would see depicted in textbooks about the dinosaur era. The alligators submerged into the dark waters of the river. Kevin and I came to the realization that they were swimming across the river towards the group of people on the other side. We started jumping up and down, waving our hands violently in the air, and screaming at the top of our lungs, telling them to get out of the river. But they did not hear or see us. Then, as if we were watching a nature documentary on Netflix, the alligators erupted out of the water. Their massive jaws snapped shut around their legs. One by one, the gold prospectors were dragged into the dark, murky depths of the river. We turned around, not wanting to see the gory details unfold, and bolted straight back into the woods, with toe-curling screams fading in the background. Once we were confident that we were far away from the river, we stopped. I turned to Kevin. "What the hell was that?" Kevin said, "Remember what the coffee farmer told us during the tour? Some native Indians are able to invoke the spirit of El Mohan and turn into giant alligators to protect the forest from people prospecting for gold in the rivers." He pointed to his Kodak camera and said, "Luckily, I took a picture of them." I was furious at his nonchalant attitude. I yelled at him immediately. "What do you mean, luckily? We could have been killed by those things." He calmly replied, "Relax. I don't think they could see us. I think it has something to do with the coffee drinks that farmer gave us." Before I had a chance to respond, we heard another scream echo through the woods. At first, I thought it was the gold prospectors from the river, but then we heard it again. It was clearly coming from a woman, and it sounded like she was nearby. Kevin and I started walking towards the direction of the scream. Even though we were intentionally following the sound, there was a strange magnetic pull drawing us towards her. We reached the top of a small hill overlooking a valley. There was a woman in a red dress lying on the steep floor of the valley. Her right leg was stuck between 2 large boulders. She screamed help in agonizing pain. Her scream reverberated across the entire valley. I told Kevin, "We need to go help her." He put his hand on my chest to stop me from walking down. He said, "Not so fast. Look over there." I looked at where he was pointing and saw 3 men coming down the valley opening. The men were wearing hard hats and logger work boots. They were moving quickly down the valley to get to the woman in the red dress. Once they reached her, they all bent down together and lifted the boulders to release her leg. We were pretty far up to make out the full details, but from the look of it, one of the men had reached out his hand to help the woman get up. But instead of the woman standing up, the man fell to the ground. It was like she had pulled him towards her. There was some scuffling in the ground and then a loud, blood-curdling scream. We thought maybe her leg was so crushed that they had to amputate it, but the scream actually came from one of the men. Then we saw 2 of the men start to run back up the valley. The man that had bent over to help the woman got up and we saw that his hand was missing. It was dripping in blood and it looked like it was completely ripped off him. He was lagging behind the others that ran ahead of him. He was making his way up the valley, but right before he reached the valley opening, a shadow emerged from the valley floor and lunged towards him. We couldn't make out clearly what it was, but it looked like some sort of feline predator with only one leg. The predator grabbed a hold of his legs and dragged him back into the depths of the valley. Considering what I just saw, you would think I would be feeling terrified. But I had this weird feeling of vengeance percolate through my body. You know that feeling of satisfaction you get when you get back at someone that wronged you? I turned to Kevin and asked, "Is that who I think we just saw?" He said, "Yeah, that was the patasola, the one-legged woman." Then I heard a timer go off. I forgot I had set an alarm on my digital wristwatch for 1 hour right before we entered the woods. I told Kevin, "Remember what the coffee farmer said? We have to get back after 1 hour." Kevin said, "I took pictures of both El Mohan and La Patasola. We still have to find El Ojaresquén. He must be around here somewhere." I didn't want to stay in those woods for a minute longer. I straight up told him, "Look, if you want to stay in these woods, then go for it. But I'm getting out of here." I turned around and started walking down the hill. I heard Kevin follow along behind me. He wouldn't be one to admit it, but I knew he was freaked out by the whole thing and was ready to leave. But something happened as soon as we got off the hill. It's like the forest recoiled as soon as we stepped on the ground. Everything started to come into focus again. It felt like we were starting to wake up from a hazy dream. Suddenly, I could feel the ground under my feet and could see our footsteps appear in our tracks as we walked. But it wasn't the footprints of our shoes that we saw. The prints that we were leaving on the ground looked like hooves from an animal. I turned to Kevin in disbelief and said, "Bro, do you see this? What's going on?" For the first time in this whole trip, Kevin looked worried. He said, "I think we're running out of time to get out of the woods." Then we heard the loud, shocking sound of a gun go off. We heard some people in the distance say, "I hear them over there. Let's get them." The feeling of vengeance that we felt before on top of the hill was now replaced by a feeling of dread. It felt like we were being hunted down by those people. We started running aimlessly through the forest as the sound of gunshots got closer towards our direction. After a few minutes, we reached the edge of a cliff. We looked over and it led straight down to a ravine. There was nowhere to escape. We were cornered. I could hear they were pretty close now, maybe 500 feet in front of us. We saw a few of them start to emerge from the trees, but they were hunched over looking at the ground. They were clearly following our tracks. But instead of making a turn towards the cliff, they kept going straight. I was confused because I see our tracks in front of us clear as day. The hunters kept walking away from us in the wrong direction. Once we were sure they were far in the distance, we came down from the cliff. Kevin said nervously, "That was a close one." But then we heard the sound of a gun being cocked. We turned around and saw a hunter pointing his rifle at us. He must have been lagging behind the rest of the hunting party. We were completely paralyzed as he lifted his rifle and took aim at us. I thought we were toast, but right before he pulled the trigger, something snuck up behind him. It was huge, like one of the mahogany trees had come to life. Its face was hidden behind a patch of moss, but we could see a large slit where the mouth should have been. As soon as the hunter turned around, that beast let out a bone-shattering roar. It was the loudest sound I have ever heard in my life. The hunter dropped his rifle immediately and bolted away in the other direction. Kevin and I were frozen in place. The creature approached us slowly, but before he got to us, I fell on my back. I saw the shadow of a figure over me as I blacked out. The next moment, I woke up in a cold sweat. I was laying down a hammock outside a cottage. Kevin was in a separate hammock next to mine. He was still asleep. It was the same cottage where the coffee farmer lived. I was dazed and confused. Did I dream up this entire thing? Before long, the coffee farmer stepped outside from the back door. He asked, "How are you feeling?" I told him, "Feeling okay, but what happened?" The coffee farmer said, "We found you boys passed out near the entrance of the woods." At that moment, Kevin woke up abruptly. Without even looking at where he was, he stuck his hand in his backpack and took out his camera. He opened it to get the film. He yelled out, "I don't believe this. The film is missing." The coffee farmer said with a sly smirk, "Maybe you forgot to put it in." Kevin said, "No, that's impossible. I know I put the film in." The coffee farmer said, "Well, that's a shame. Anyway, you boys better get back to the park. Your teacher is rounding up the other students to get back on the bus." Before we left the cottage, I turned to the coffee farmer and asked him, "Is what we saw in the woods real?" He took a short pause and then replied, "I don't know what you saw in those woods, but you boys should consider yourselves lucky to make it out the way you did." That's all I needed to hear. We got our backpacks, thanked the coffee farmer, and bolted out of there. We got back to the parking lot right as Miss Vicky was doing a head count of the students. She said firmly, "There you boys are. Where have you been?" I said, "Sorry, we were in the bathroom." Long line. She rolled her eyes and led us inside the bus. On the bus ride back home, Kevin and I sat quietly. I was replaying the events of that day in my head. Kevin was still rummaging in his backpack looking for the film. He kept whispering under his breath, I know I didn't forget it. I know I didn't forget it. Poor kid was in denial. Once we got back to school, Miss Vicky handed out a small bag to each student as we got off the bus. She said it was a gift from the coffee park. All the kids opened it while we were waiting outside the school for our rides back home, and it looked like everyone got the same thing. There were some chocolates, pens with logos from the coffee park, and those souvenir magnets that you can put in your fridge. But Kevin and I noticed there was something else in our bag after we took out those items. We turned the bag upside down on our palms and shook it. 3 coffee beans popped out of that bag. 1 yellow, 1 green, and 1 red. So I'm not exactly sure what happened that day. Maybe the coffee drinks that the farmer gave to us was some sort of ayahuasca concoction that made us hallucinate the entire thing. Or maybe we somehow saw the memories that were imprinted on the woods from decades of pillaging and deforestation. Whatever it was, there is something very strange happening in Colombia's coffee region. If you ever go to Parque del Café, don't wander off in the woods, be kind to nature, and be careful of the coffee you drink there. Until next time.